The 60s scoop refers to the disruptive practice of taking or scooping up indigenous children from their families and communities for placement in foster homes or adoption. Although this government policy seems to refer to a single decade, the scoop was practiced in Canada from the 1950s to the 1980s.
I was 12 years old and 3 younger siblings. We were all 2 years apart, so the youngest was 6 years old. We moved to Cornwall Island, Ontario, the Ontario portion of Akwesasne, and from there, that's where we were taken from. I have memories of when we were going through that toll booth, which I didn't know where I was going, you know.
Initially, the federal and provincial governments reported that increased numbers of Indigenous fostering and adoptions were due to the rising numbers of illegitimate Indigenous births, broken marriages, socio-economic issues, and poverty. Through government program and policy, it was the hope that different races would begin to understand each other better through integration, acculturation, and assimilation.
We didn't know who this agency was. It was, you have to come with us. We have to find a place for you, because for me, I thought it was like my parents were neglectful, and that's what was in my head, that's why they lost us, you know? And then that's when it started.
I think that sometimes we can make evil look like it's moral. The people who decided to separate First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children from their families, those persons had already deemed us as a group to be the savage and themselves to be the civilized. They never questioned whether where they were putting these children would be any better for them.
Ultimately, the 60s scoop followed in the footsteps and actions of residential schools where the social worker replaced the missionary in removing Native children from their homes. Most of these children never returned to their homes or communities, or if they did, they were not accepted.
So not only do we have the 60s scoop coming in with child welfare, removing vast numbers of children and placing them for permanent adoption, we also have the residential schools operating in that same way during that same time. And I've seen so many 60s scoop survivors trying to search for their childhoods years and years later.
They took us to a non-Native foster home in Monkland, Ontario. My foster father was Czechoslovakian. My foster mother was German. They had 3 kids of their own.
Roughly 20,000 Indigenous children were taken from their families and fostered or adopted out to primarily white middle-class families. As a result, these children experienced severed ties with their families and culture, especially through the loss of their First Nation languages.
We lost our identity, we lost our culture, we lost our language, and a lot of shame of who we were, or we are, you know.
I don't think it's ever completely possible. I don't think you can ever recover from a childhood that is lost to you. You put pieces back together, and you do that in a way that allows you to live with the most dignity possible.
Great harm resulted from the 60s scoop, including intergenerational evidence that the loss of a child's Aboriginal identity left children fundamentally disoriented with a reduced ability to lead healthy, loving, or fulfilled lives.
Coming from a family of 8 siblings, 4 of us were taken. And my role in that family changed because I became the older sibling to my 3 younger sisters. 2 of them are still struggling from the trauma from it all, what we suffered in there, some sexual abuse. A lot of memories have been like, sometimes you block that out, to protect yourself. For me, I'm a survivor, and I worked through the grief of losing my family and all the abuse that I've gone through.
Many lawsuits were filed over the last several decades as a result of the disruption of lives caused by the 60s scoop. In addition, the House of Commons passed Royal Assent on C-92, an act representing First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children, youth, and families. This legislation was developed with Indigenous, provincial, and territorial partners with the goal of keeping Indigenous children and youth connected to their families, communities, and culture.
We don't applaud them for good first steps because no other children in this country have to fight or litigate to just be treated equally. We still don't see governments, even with the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, really owning the pain and anguish that their discrimination seeded in First Nations children, youth, and families, and the fact that it's ongoing. They haven't learned that they must stand in that shame.
It was a rough 5 years that you have to heal over. I'm really grateful for all the healing, and I'm still healing today. It's never ending. You're a survivor. Don't look back. Be proud of who you are. Be proud you're Okwesasne.